We now, I think, know pretty clearly the sort of statistical structure of a population in regard to its suggestibility. Quite clearly, if everybody were extremely unsuggestible, organized society would be quite impossible. And if everybody were extremely suggestible, then dictatorship would be absolutely inevitable. I mean, it's very fortunate we have people who are moderately suggestible in the majority. But once given the fact that there are these 20% of highly suggestible people, it becomes quite clear that this is a matter of enormous political importance. For example, any demagogue who is able to get hold of a large number of these 20% of suggestible people and to organize them is really in a position to overthrow any government in any country. This differential suggestibility, this susceptibility to hypnosis, I do think is something which has to be considered very carefully in relation to any kind of thought about democratic government. I mean, if there are 20% of the people who can really be suggested into believing almost anything, as evidently they can be, then we have to take extremely careful steps to prevent the rise of demagogues.
The limbic system, or the emotional brain, is a complex network that controls our basic drives, core emotions, long-term memories, and survival instincts like fight or flight. It's something which has been exploited for time immemorial in some form or another, whether it be keeping people distracted or fearful, or even to get them to buy things. Today, in addition to all that, it's being exploited by social media platforms. What kinds of effects are produced by constant appeals to our limbic system by these platforms? One obvious effect is an extremely unnatural obsession with novelty. We don't know when the next interesting, funny, shocking, frustrating, or personally relevant item might appear, but we know it's coming eventually. The brain is continually offered something new before it has time to become bored with the previous stimulus. This conditions us to actually prefer rapid, repeated novelty over sustained attention. Another obvious effect is social validation. Humans are extraordinarily sensitive to relative social status. Likes, comments, followers, shares, views, and notifications turn social approval into measurable rewards that we become increasingly dependent upon. Personalized social media feeds gradually turn comparison into a habit involving constant assessment of wealth, attractiveness, accomplishments, relationships, popularity, and social status. This surveillance becomes increasingly compulsive over time. The final example is identity reinforcement. This one's particularly interesting. Anger, fear, disgust, and perceived injustice are extremely salient limbic stimuli. Once identity becomes intertwined with the platform's feedback system, we become just as interested in finding opposition as we are in finding agreement. Even if engagement starts out naturally, with something like a shared or recommended video from a friend, the algorithm goes to work on us with a feedback loop that tracks clicks and creates feeds accordingly. Being outraged can slowly become rewarding in itself. Without a concerted effort, we increasingly find ourselves seeking out things that make us angry. The cognitive dissonance resulting from this also creates opportunities for would-be authoritarian leaders who know citizenry will tolerate much more overreaching policy when in this state to get rid of the perceived threat. What these all have in common is they all tap into deeply seated reward centers and impulse-driven behaviors that can be easily exploited to reliably produce interest and engagement that extends far beyond what is organic, spontaneous, or natural. This interest could be centered around pleasure, curiosity, anticipation, social approval, envy, fear, anger, disgust, anxiety, social status, and virtually anything that is intrinsically important to human beings. When the same platform that is constantly analyzing our clicks is also feeding us with an endless supply of tailor-made content, chronic overstimulation becomes almost inevitable. Since the brain is equipped with reinforcement mechanisms that turn repeatedly successful behaviors into increasingly automatic ones, we eventually begin responding automatically before there is any conscious deliberation at all. So today, instead of being engaged with real life, surveilling things that are intrinsically important to us, our limbic systems, our emotional brains, are largely engaged surveilling an artificial milieu of sensationalistic, algorithmic trivia with a particularly disturbing bias for conflict. It's not just a great way to waste time, it's also a great place to become highly polarized and tribal, which is why we now live in an ideal social environment for an authoritarian movement. Every thinking person, therefore, has to wonder about the extent to which social media platforms are in league with governments. A bit of historical context that underscores just how well understood these ideas are comes from a book called Eros and Magic in the Renaissance by Juan Petru Culianu, former professor of the history of religions at the University of Chicago. Culianu wrote proficiently in 6 languages and specialized in Gnosticism and the Renaissance. In the book, he shows Renaissance magic not to be mere superstitious nonsense, but a high art of emotional and psychological influence over individuals and crowds, a science designed to map, navigate, and manipulate the human mind and collective. This system relies heavily on Eros as the fundamental energy that binds individuals and masses to specific beliefs, ideas, and political or religious controls. The magic that concerns us here is theoretically a science of the imaginary, which it explores through its own methods and seeks to manipulate at will. At its greatest degree of development, reached in the work of Giordano Bruno, magic is a means of control over the individual and the masses based on deep knowledge of personal and collective erotic impulses. The magician of the Renaissance is both psychoanalyst and prophet, as well as the precursor of modern professions, such as director of public relations, propagandist, spy, politician, censor, director of mass communication media, and publicity agent. Sounds and images are not chosen at random. They stem from the occult language of the universal spirit. With regard to sounds, the manipulator should know that tragic harmonies give rise to more passions than comic ones, being able to act on souls in doubt. Everything is defined in relation to Eros, since aversion and hatred merely represent the negative side of the same universal attraction. It is all the easier to enchain people who have less knowledge. In them, the soul opens in such a way that it makes room for the passage of impressions aroused by the performer's techniques, opening wide windows which, in others, are always closed. The performer has means at his disposal to forge all the chains he wants: hope, compassion, fear, love, hate, indignation, anger, joy, patience, disdain for life and death, or fortune.